It's time to talk Jacksonville Jaguars football on the Our Football Network for the OFN today. And that means John Oesher is joining us from Jaguars. Actually, is it jags.com or jaguars.com?
Jaguars.com.
I should know better.
Work, but we use jaguars.com.
Yeah, do they? So if they type in jags.com, will it be? Do you know if they'll be moved over to?
Good question. I just bookmark it. I'm an old man.
I know. All right, John. So, I'll be honest with you. We did a show after the draft, and we went over all 32 drafts. We didn't grade any. I don't like the grade thing, but we talked about what did we feel, obviously, about how each team did. And when I went over Jacksonville's 13 picks, couple of things I was a little bit confused by, and I'm glad we're definitely getting the opportunity to talk. I thought that early on, I expected them to go a little bit more on defense with their first several picks, and instead their first three were on offense. And I know there were a few players that it looked like they picked based on our lads' grades went a lot higher, including their tight end choice with Strange in round 2. How did how before you get to answering all these questions, because I have a lot of them, we'll go one by one. What was the reception by the media and by the fans?
Oh, probably about the same. I mean, because media and fans sort of look at pre-draft needs, and this team really didn't skew their board or go away from their board based on needs. The Anton Harrison pick. A lot of people, that was the first round, number 27 overall. A lot of people said, well, that made sense because Cam Robinson could be suspended. But the reality is that was going to be the pick, Cam Robinson or not, because they look at it like they need good players at the tackle position for down the road. This draft for them was a 4 or 5 year draft, not a 1 year draft, and they stuck with value. They consider Brenton Strange a really good fit for this Doug Peterson offense. The same with Tank Bigsby. Probably the way to look at this draft and understand it a little more is to look at that, knowing that they were not going to jump up and take, quote, a pass rusher or a cornerback over a player that they liked better than that. The second thing to look at is Doug Peterson really likes running back by committee and multiple tight ends. Well, last year, Travis Etienne was really their lone big-time running back, and Evan Ingram was really their lone big-time tight end. Yeah. Doug Peterson, running back by committee in Philadelphia, if you remember. No 1,000-yard rusher.
Absolutely.
But guys. Last year, Evan Ingram, really their only go-to option at tight end. Think about Philly a little bit. A lot of people asked me last year, well, why aren't they using multiple tight ends like Philly? Well, they didn't really love their, the options for those kind of offenses. So they went out and got Brenton Strange, who they believe in the long run can be a good tight end going forward, but also gives them a tight end room as opposed to one tight end. So I think that's really what they didn't go into the draft saying, hey, we've got to do this. Once the board started falling that way, they were fine with that approach of giving Doug more weapons on offense.
Okay. And let's talk about the offensive line, because I know that just looking at the depth chart, it looks like the biggest question is at left guard. And right now, is Barch definitely looking like he's going to be the guy that will start opening day, or do they have another plan that
might... It depends. I mean, it's, I would say this. Barch hurts his ACL last year, week 5. So theoretically, he could be back for opening day. Many players are back for opening day. I don't think they necessarily feel like they have to have him back for opening day. Okay. Tyler Shatley, who's their backup center, played guard last year, I think, for the final 12 games plus two postseason games, if I remember right. Wouldn't surprise you to see Shatley start at that spot. Also, once the season gets going, Barch could come in, take that job back. Also, we don't know how long yet that Cam Robinson's going to be out, if at all. We're assuming he's going to be out. It would surprise me if when Robinson returns, if Walker Little, who's going to start at left tackle, Anton Harrison, who's going to start at right tackle, and Cam Robinson, who's the left tackle, those three guys are going to be on the field somewhere. I'd be very surprised if one of them goes to swing tackle. Wouldn't surprise me at all if maybe Anton Harrison, once Cam Robinson gets back, wouldn't surprise me if Anton Harrison kicked into guard for this season until such time as Cam Robinson is no longer with the team and they figure out tackle. So I think you're going to see a best five more than a depth chart situation on the offensive line.
Yeah, I had a feeling about that, so I'm glad you reinforced those feelings.
Yeah, that's not etched in stone, by the way.
Sure.
But, I'd say the overriding approach that you have to look at with offensive line for this team right now. Last season, they got to the postseason for the first time in 5 years. Tyler Shatley came in and played 12 games at left guard. I'm getting that right. Walker Little came in and played the last 3 regular season games in the postseason at left tackle. This team believes you need 7 offensive linemen. They needed it last year to get to the postseason. That, to me, dictated the Harrison pick as much as anything. Not necessarily needing a starter somewhere, but needing 7 or 8 offensive linemen who can really play. That feels to me like there's going to be a theme for this team going forward, no matter what year we're talking about under this regime.
And they must be pretty content for at least next year with the players on the roster, the veterans, because Harrison was pretty much, I mean, they did take Hodges in the 7th round, but that's it as far as reinforcements, young reinforcements along the offensive line. I was a little bit surprised with 13 picks they didn't add another earlier offensive lineman.
Hodges is a guy that they really think he was a tackle in college. Think he's going, maybe not this year, but long-term depth-wise, they really think they got a shot with this guy to have found something. But overall, if he develops, which a young, I think he's 7th rounder, young 7th rounder probably needs into his 2nd year to develop to realistically make a contribution historically. Beyond that, though, you brought 4 guys back who are starters. You still have Shatley, you still have Barton, you added Anton Harrison. So there's your 7-ish.
Yep.
And I think that's really, right now, this team believes you got to have 7 who you trust step on the field at any given time. I think they feel comfortable with that, with the idea that Hodges will develop by late this season or next season.
Okay. Let's talk about I tell you what, let's stay on offense, talk about Bigsby, because as you mentioned, not a surprise that they added another running back, knowing Peterson's background. And they must have been pretty happy to get Bigsby right around where I think most people thought Bigsby could land in round 3. He's got a lot of talent, and we know what Etienne did last year. So again, they must have been pretty happy with this pickup.
Yeah, I think so. I think this, to me, showed me in this draft they were truly sticking to their board and not going for need, because a lot of people thought they were going to go corner here or go pass rush. But I really think when they looked at it last year, Etienne was big time, and JaMychal Hasty played well in his place. But beyond that, there were late in the season when Etienne would go down, as all running backs do, and he would have a moment where he's on the turf and sort of going off and coming back on. You held your breath a little bit over what they would do if he wasn't in the game. Bigsby gives them, I maintain, Greg, these days, you can't have just 11 offensive starters.
Sure.
So he really gives them a guy at the running back position where you're not that worried if Etienne goes out. The second part of the Bigsby selection was this. They were not a very good short yardage offense last year.
Okay.
If you look at what they did offensively, they added a guy who can play fullback in the 7th round. I don't know if that'll be immediate. They clearly wanted to address short yardage offense. Etienne is a very aggressive physical runner, but he's not that heavy. Bigsby is a guy you look at can run between the tackles. So I think they're looking to shore up. It was funny. A lot of people said this wasn't really a need pick. In a lot of ways it was, because when they want to get to where they're a diverse offense that can go after, score 30, 31 points a game, get up there with the Kansas Cities of the world, they needed to get a little more versatile in a couple of spots, and Bigsby is one of those guys.
Okay. Speaking of, because then, even though they didn't use their first several picks on offense, They sure handled the defensive side for the rest of the draft. And let's talk about those 2 fourth rounders, because Tyler Lacey, now our lads, just like Strange, our lads had Lacey and Strange as guys that could have gone later in the draft, but it only takes one GM, one scouting department to, hey, this is a need. This fits exactly what we're looking for type of player. And I would guess, starting with Tyler Lacey, they felt that this guy fits what Jacksonville's looking for. So talk a little bit about why they really like Lacey in the fourth.
Well, I like him because if you look at their front seven on defense, was not where they wanted it to be last year, just in terms of the ability to get pass rush. I don't know if Lacey's a pure pass rushing guy, but they had a guy last year on defense named Dwan Smoot, who, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Dwan Smoot for them last year, and for the last 3 or 4 years, really has been sort of a Swiss Army knife type defensive end. Not a huge pass rush guy, but 5 or 6 sacks.
Sure.
Who can play the edge when you need him. He can play defensive end. In pass rush, he can go inside, and play inside a tackle. Lacey sort of projects to that. Now, realistically, I'm not a guy who believes that a 4th round pick is going to come in and just light the world on fire first year. But in trying to build this team for the long run, they needed to get depth. They needed to have more of a rotation on their front seven. To me, that's where Lacey fits in. Again, I'm not a big believer that anybody after the 3rd round that they're counting on to make a huge impact.
Yep.
Lacey fits that, as does the next guy you're going to talk about, Ventrell Miller, who is a linebacker from Florida. He was injured a lot, but an older guy, 23, 24 years old. They firmly believe that this is a guy who, if there's an injury, he can come in and get you by as a young player on defense, and can really play special teams. So I would look at their 4th and 5th round for the most part was about making sure they had numbers on special teams, on the defensive front, to get through an 18-game season.
Yeah, because the Miller pickup was, again, one of those that kind of threw me a little bit, because they did such a good job last year in the draft picking up 2 guys, Lloyd and Muma. You've got the other veterans in there, and it just looked like it was like, wow, they're just really bolstering up that linebacking unit. And not to say that they can't use better, more defensive players, because we just talked about that was the thought process earlier as far as the draft was concerned. But they have a deep linebacking crew now.
Well, again, to me, this draft really showed that Trent Baalke putting the money where the mouth is, in terms of saying, hey, I'm not drafting for need. We're drafting to have a roster for the duration. I agree with you. Even last year, I drafted Chad Muma after Devin Lloyd. That struck a lot of people as funny, because you look at depth charts and say, well, you didn't really need that. Well, they thought he was the best player, and gave them options up front, and for the next 2 or 3 years gives you depth. I think you got to look at Ventrell Miller the same way. Plus, this team really wants to be good on special teams and wants to have guys on that front seven. I think they want 13 or 14 guys who they trust on that defensive front seven. And I'm exaggerating the number a little bit, but they want to be able to rotate. They want to be able to move guys around, and they want to be able to go deep on that front seven. So I think they accomplished that. And I think with these guys, 4th and 5th round, we'll see really how they pan out in 2024.
Yeah, because Abdullah, who went in the 5th round, that was really he would be considered like the one guy that could add a little bit in the pass rush department. Is that what they're looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, he's also a guy that I think he had 25 sacks in 25 games. I think is the number that jumps out. I may be wrong on that, but he led the ACC in sacks last year. He's a guy who, realistically, with Josh Allen on one side, Trayvon Walker on the other, and even Kayvon Chason, who's on this roster, they've got their front 3, and I would anticipate they could even add a defensive end in free agency. That's not off the table in terms of adding a high name pass rusher, if you will. So realistically, do they need an Abdullah to come in and play right away? If he does, great. But you're also looking at trying to find a guy who can develop. He has the pass rushing trait of having had numbers there before. He's got the productivity. A little smaller, a little shorter, They believe he can rush the passer and also has a little bit of size to not be a liability against the run, which is what you have so often when you have late round pass rushers who have numbers.
Let's talk about another player that I would guess is going to be someone they're going to count on for special teams, but also in the defensive backfield for sure, and that's Antonio Johnson, because Antonio actually we just talked about some of the draft picks that people felt maybe Jacksonville drafted a few guys a little earlier than expected. Well, this was a big surprise that Antonio Johnson lasted until the 5th round. Did you find out, were there any questions about why Antonio Johnson was even available there? And they had to be pretty happy to land a kid like that with that kind of talent in round 5.
Yeah, their thought was just a lot of times in the draft this day. And remember, the draft this year the consensus was that after the first few picks in the first round, everybody had this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's just a thought that sometimes when if you liken it to a game of musical chairs, which that's sort of what the draft usually is, somebody's going to be left not sitting down on a chair at some point a lot later than they want to be. And that kind of was what Antonio was. They're not penciling him in as a starter.
Sure.
They have Rashawn Jenkins and they have Andre Cisco they like. But Rashawn Jenkins, realistically, he's going into his 3rd year here as an unrestricted free agent. At some point, that contract with a veteran who signs big deal, as you know, 3rd year, at some point that contract has to be readdressed. Is he here after this year? They love him, but they have decisions to make on a lot of players next year. It's sort of their year where a lot of stuff comes up. Can Antonio Johnson come in and be that guy who replaces that guy eventually? That's what he has to prove. If it was a guarantee, he'd have been a 1st or 2nd round pick.
Sure.
But they certainly like him. They like his ability. They like what he can bring. Now it's just a matter of getting on the field and doing it.
Okay, now there were a handful of 6th and 7th rounders, so don't need to go into all of them, but if you had to guess which 1 or 2 we should be keeping an eye on the most.
Well, I would say Hodges.
Okay.
7th round tackle out of Appalachian State, but he's probably going to play guard in the NFL. I don't put a whole lot of stock into things I see in rookie minicamps just because these days they're orientation realistically. Yeah. But power looks the part. I mean, a lot of times offensive linemen come in and you think, okay, he's going to need a year of being in an NFL weight room to really work, such as late round guys. It looks like he can play right away. I don't think he will on this team. So he's interesting. Some hand power that you liked last weekend. And they certainly think he has a chance. I'd say the other guy immediately to look at is Parker Washington, 6th round receiver from Penn State. He's going to be a Christian Kirk understudy at first. Looks a lot physically like Christian Kirk. But the wide receiver core here is interesting. You've got Ridley, Kirk, and Zay Jones. That's going to be your 3.
Yep.
After that, you have Jamal Agnew, Tim Jones last year play. Parker Washington, if he develops quickly, I think will have a chance to play a role right away. I'm not going to overplay a 4th receiver's role in this offense because when you have Ingram, Etienne, and the 3 wide receivers, your 4th receiver is not going to be a go-to guy. It's going to be a lot of 4 wide receiver sets. But they think he's capable, coming from a program like Penn State. I think there's a thought that he will have a way to be productive pretty early if he is in the lineup for injury reasons or for situational reasons.
Okay. So Hodges and Washington. Talk a little bit about any of the undrafted free agents that might have caught your eye or they're talking about. Because I know we talked about Garrett Prince as one of them last year.
Yeah.
And I still think Garrett Prince could be somebody to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Prince is definitely the guy. He's last year, obviously. Kevin Austin from last year looked pretty good in rookie minicamp. I'll be honest with you. There are a couple of guys in rookie minicamp, but when you look at the numbers, I would say that realistically, the guys they liked as rookie free agents, they probably took in the 7th round. Okay. Meaning they had 13 picks, remember?
Yes.
So they drafted probably 3 or 4 guys who I'd normally be sitting here talking about.
Yep.
Derek Parrish, who they moved from edge. At Houston, he was an edge.
Yep.
He's going to play fullback. Realistically, in most years here, he would have been a rookie free agent signing. So probably they ate up most of their guys who they feel really great about when they were drafting them in the 7th round as far as rookie free agents. But history tells you somebody out of that class will make it.
Yeah. I think Dave Syvertson, who's our lead scout at our lads, said Leonard Taylor is the one that interests him to keep an eye on, especially with the tight end room and how much Peterson loves that position. All right. So if you had to take a look at what the team believes they just couldn't finish this offseason, and there's still a position or something that they have to, hey, you know what, next offseason we have to attack this, or this is going to be maybe the one position this season that we were a little bit concerned with. Which would that be?
Well, probably edge and nickel. And when I say that, I say it like this. I think they could still make a move at nickel in veteran free agency to pick up a guy who has been in the NFL, who knows how to get it done. I don't think they felt like they needed frontline guy there, or they'd have taken it in 2nd or 3rd round. So I think you can still see a move there. You can still see pass rush. Next off season is going to be interesting because it would stand to reason they're going to re-sign Trevor Lawrence to his long-term deal. So the salary cap is going to be a major issue. I expect them to lose some guys that are familiar names because they're going to be restructuring the roster really around him, as any team sort of has to do. Now, I'm not saying they're going to cut guys. It's not going to be salary cap hell. There's going to be a couple of familiar veterans who sort of have to go because of that rookie contract and because of their restructuring things. Right now, they're a pretty good lineup on their front 22. I would say one more pass rusher in June and early July. Don't be surprised if there's chatter about them picking up a guy who can get them 5 or 6 sacks, a la Arden Key last year.
Makes a lot of sense. And by the way, Antonio Johnson, in his report, our lad's report, it says that it's possible that wherever he lands, he could be looked at as a big nickel.
And when I'm talking nickel, I mean more like the corner nickel.
Yeah, standard nickel, sure. Yeah.
And I think Antonio Johnson definitely, this team in the last couple of years has played some big safety in that spot too. Antonio Johnson certainly makes sense for that. Is he that pure cover nickel that you sort of need? That to me would be the one area that I would be concerned about if I was this franchise right now. But I think their thought in the draft in this offseason was, you know what, are we going to get significantly better rushing the passer through the draft this year? Picking at number 27 or no 25, which they went into it with, realistically, Greg, you and I know it's hard to get big-time immediate pass rush help that late.
Yeah.
I think they looked at it and said, let's get great on one side of the ball. Let's get really deep. Let's make sure Trevor's protected. Let's make sure we can go tight ends when we want to, play running back by committee. I think they pushed their chips all the way in on offense this year.
All right. Well, as always, John, I appreciate it. Great talk with getting us up to speed and what is going on with Jacksonville following the draft. And you talked about, before I let you go, you talked about a couple of players that may not be available before the regular season. You mentioned Barch. Of course, Cam Robinson's got suspension down the road. So do we have to? When is that, by the way, going to be official?
Who knows?
Nobody knows. Okay.
Yeah. It's been reported. Nothing official. I would assume that means appealing, trying to figure out exactly what's going on, retesting, all those things you always hear about with that.
Sure.
I haven't heard official on that, but you would assume that that's what's going on before anything is announced officially by the league.
And is that it as far as players that may not be available?
Barch was the ACL last year that kept him out. Cam got hurt late in the season, but his reason for being out is going to be suspension and
Yes.
not, and they were pretty healthy beyond that.
Okay.
I'm trying to jog my memory. Not really. Jordan Smith, the pass rusher from the 2021 draft, ACL last off season, but you would think by training camp he'll be ready to go. Can he give him some pass rush? Hasn't played a lot in the league, but we'll see.
Yeah, and Smith and Chason, really, this is you got to figure this might be it for both of them, right? This is put up or shut up type of seasons for them.
Yeah, well, Chason's going into the fourth year,
Yeah.
so hadn't done much pass rushing wise yet. Was nice depth the last year. Yeah, if he's going to do it, it's got to be now.
Well, I look forward to talking to you again before the season starts, when we get a chance to preview the season or, of course, training camp of the preseason, John. So, again, thanks for your time. Look forward to talking to you in a few months.
Greg, fantastic, buddy. We'll talk to you.
Thanks, John.